So we are implementing a new subcontract monitoring plan that will help us be more compliant and adhere to recent audit findings. Here is our agenda for this training. I have bolded the scope of work tracking because that's really what I want to focus on because that's what is changing from our process, and it is what PIs will now need to add on to their subrecipient monitoring so that we can remain compliant. So first, why are we implementing these changes and why now? The entire university Anschutz had a audit that identified that most units are not adhering to the internal subrecipient monitoring processes that have been established on campus. So now they have fiscal compliance has asked each unit to create and follow our own subcontract monitoring plan. They're giving us each the independence to create our own in order to make sure that the processes and systems work for each individual unit. So, Cayenne is implementing this specific plan to make sure that we are prepared for future audits and that we are compliant with federal cost principles on our sponsored projects. So, roles and responsibilities for subcontract monitoring. We have four different categories of people. The first is fiscal compliance at the university Anschutz level. They review the university's subrecipients' single audits and issue management decisions for audit findings. And then they regularly keep track of current audit environment. So the response here really came from fiscal compliance, and they gave us the initial training that led to this subrecipient plan being developed. And then next is the OGC subcontracts, and they are responsible for outgoing subagreements. So they're who we work with day to day to get the subagreements signed and processed. They also handle the initial compliance review, which means that they send us a risk assessment for each of our subrecipients. And overall, they, as I said, process and sign each sub agreement. And then we have Cayenne Fiscal. So Cayenne Fiscal is responsible for processing subcontracts with OGC, processing and tracking invoices, and ensuring that subrecipients spend within their allocated funds. We're also responsible for implementing and tracking this overall subrecipient monitoring plan. You will see how the roles between Cayenne Fiscal and PIs differ as we go through this training. But mostly Cayenne Fiscal is more involved in processing and invoicing, and PIs should be more involved in ensuring that they are meeting the scope of work and the communication requirements with their subrecipient. So overall, just to summarize, PIs are responsible for ensuring that each subrecipient is making adequate progress on the subagreement and that each invoice is appropriate and accurate based on the scope of work. The PI has to maintain regular communication with each subrecipient and needs to report on that progress and that communication at least quarterly, which is exactly what we're implementing for this new subrecipient monitoring plan. So just to re-emphasize this idea of this risk assessment, because it will come up in the next few slides as we go through the process, they should send, OGC Subcontract sends a risk assessment code for each of our new subrecipients. And they either will mark low score, moderate score, or high score. And for the sake of this process, we respond one way with a low score and another way with a moderate or high score. So I'll be sure to mention the differences there for both our invoicing and our scope of work tracking. So, just to remind everybody of the process for actually creating and amending subcontracts, this is something that's been in place for a while and is pretty streamlined. So, we're not adjusting anything here. So, the PI submits the request for new or amended subcontract through FormStack. Cayenne Fiscal processes the subcontract using our application Trello, and then Cayenne Fiscal will email the subrecipient their fully executed agreement or amendment when it's complete. And we wanted to review part of making sure that we are compliant is that we are saving and retaining the correct documentation. We, of course, save everything based on the CU policies of length of time. And here I've just listed what we are collecting and what we are saving each year, each amendment. So this is more the responsibility to collect from the from for Cayenne Fiscal, but we wanted you to be aware that these are the requirements. If you're ever wondering why, we ask for the scope of work each year, or we're asking for specific documents when we create a new subcontract. So we need to make sure that these documents are being saved for each of our subcontracts. And then next is invoicing. Again, we really haven't changed much in this process because our process to date is very solid and we are strong at tracking our invoicing and making sure that the subrecipients are invoicing monthly and appropriately. The only change that we have here is the statement for when PIs sign the invoices. So just to review the process, we have Cayenne Fiscal receives the invoice from the subrecipient and reviews it for many different criteria, including whether or not there are enough funds in the subcontract, as well as if it's an appropriate amount compared to other months, and then specific things like whether or not the invoice has a date or is signed. And then after we review and approve it, and if there's any back and forth, we get the final invoice. We process it through DocuSign and ask the PI to review and sign it. And this statement that's listed here is showing that as when you sign it, you are approving that the payments requested um, are appropriate for the aims of the subcontract scope of work and they're in line with their approved budget. So we've just expanded the statement a little bit to make sure that we're capturing what is needed for appropriate subrecipient monitoring. So then after that's signed by the PI, we make sure, we send it um, into PSC and they process that invoice. And we on the back end are, of course, tracking each invoice to make sure that they're paid out and tracking every invoice that has come in. So we have that all in one place. And then just a reminder here with rack, we if there is a low rack score for the subrecipient, then Kind Fiscal will just periodically request full transaction reports for a single invoice. But if there is a moderate or high rack score for the subrecipient, the Cayenne Fiscal will need to ask for the subrecipient to provide full transaction reports for every invoice. So we currently do not have any subrecipients that received a moderate or high score, but if we ever do, we will work on that process together. And then um, this is our brand new process and what we are adding. So up until now, just a few slight improvements, but this is our new update. So we are implementing a quarterly scope of work process. Um, that we will fill out for each subrecipient. Sorry, there's a typo. So Cayenne is implementing a new quarterly scope of work process, and the PIs will fill this out for each subrecipient that they work with on their sponsored projects. Cayenne Fiscal will track completion and save responses to this form, and we so that we can access this if we get audited, everything will be in one place. We're expecting that each form for per subrecipient should take a PI only 5 to 10 minutes to complete. It's very brief, and we've done some of the work for you. And if the rack for the subrecipient indicates moderate or high score, we will have to have a more in-depth process for tracking that subrecipient, and we will work with each individual PI and subrecipient to create an individualist plan to make sure that we're still compliant with those moderate or high risk subrecipients. So let's go through the process. Each month, oh, not each month, each quarter, so every 3 months, a PI will get an individual email for each of the subrecipients on your sponsored projects. The email will look like this. It will say what project, who the subrecipient is, and the PI, and then it will give you an individualized link that will send you to the correct form. And we ask you to fill out this form within 2 weeks of when you receive it, and then we will follow up if we haven't gotten a response. So once you click on that link, this is all in Smartsheet, you will be led to a form. There is other information up top here that is pre-filled out that you don't need to worry about. You just want to make sure you're thinking about the right project and the right subrecipient. And then it's going to ask you the meat of this form, and that is this statement. So you're deciding whether this is true or false. Regarding the subrecipient listed above, the subrecipient has demonstrated satisfactory progress. The subrecipient's performance is consistent with the scope of work outlined in the agreement. The subrecipient continues to meet compliance requirements and communication between the University of Colorado PI and subrecipient PI has been consistent and adequate within the quarterly review date listed above. So then you're going to select this statement is true or this statement is false. If you select that the above statement is true, you will then be prompted to answer these two additional questions. Briefly describe your correspondence efforts and where actual documentation can be found if needed, and include telephone conversations, emails, or site visits, etc. I've provided some examples of what kind of documentation we're talking about, but really you don't need to put that into this form. You just need to mention that it is available if you're asked. So if you save meeting minutes every month that you meet with the subrecipient or with the group of subrecipients, that's a great way to track correspondence. If you have a folder with emails with that specific subrecipient, great way. Or if you even have a spreadsheet that says every time you've emailed them, that works as well. And then the next question is summarize your overall satisfaction with the subrecipient's use of funds and performance goals. So this is just explaining how they've been meeting the goals, whether or not or that they're in budget and that they're meeting each goal as time passes. And here, and then if you do not agree with the statement and they are not meeting, they're not demonstrating satisfactory progress, you would say the above statement is false. And then you would describe in detail what steps you are taking to rectify the subrecipient not meeting their requirements. So I have provided some examples for answers that are good to these questions. They do need to be detailed. So for this first one, you can see they talk about how frequently they're meeting the type of communication that they have with this subrecipient, and what they have been working on within this quarterly period and how they've been responsive. And then the last thing that they provide here is how they record this participation through their meeting minutes. And then here is a good example of the answer to the second question. So they are showing that they're highly satisfied. They're talking about what work they have performed, and again, that they've been responsive, and just showing why they've been how they've been satisfactory and what goals they've been meeting. And then here's what two bad answers would look like. So, you just say, we've communicated, they attend meetings. That is not enough detail to be compliant. And then for the second one, just saying that you're satisfied with their work. Again, not enough detail to be compliant. And we will send that back and ask you to refill it out. So you might as well fill it out with more detail to begin with. And then if you do answer that you're not satisfied, which we are hoping doesn't happen too often, but don't be afraid to fill that out because we're here to help and to solve this problem. That's the point of the subrecipient monitoring, is that we're not having subrecipients who are not complying and not working through towards their scope of work. And we want to be able to find solutions to that as soon as possible. So if you select false, then you will want to describe in detail what steps you are taking to rectify the subrecipient not meeting the requirements, but that won't stop there. Crime and Fiscal will then follow up with you to create a plan together to figure out how to move that subrecipient towards compliance. And that is the training for our new and improved subrecipient monitoring plan. Feel free to reach out with any questions. We are happy to help as we implement this new process. Thank you.